From the very first moment, something felt off. In the spring of 1986, a young couple set off into the Oregon wilderness, choosing a simple trail for a quiet week away. No steep climbs, no risky campsites, just peace. They weren't seasoned hikers, but they knew enough to stay on track. No one imagined it would be the last time anyone saw them alive. The morning air was crisp as Kevin Marshall tightened the straps on his backpack, his eyes scanning the pine-lined trailhead of Cedar Hills. Sunlight filtered softly through the trees, casting long shadows on the ground. Next to him, Emily Rhodes adjusted her wool beanie and smiled, the kind of calm, affectionate look that comes from 3 years of shared memories, dreams, and disagreements. 4 days, she said, her voice half mocking. No phones, no distractions, just us. Kevin laughed. And maybe some deer, maybe a bear or two. They kissed quickly, then turned to the trail. Behind them, their car sat quietly in the gravel lot, already gathering a film of dust. Cedar Hills wasn't the most remote region in Oregon, but it wasn't crowded either. It had a reputation for solitude, no cell signal, no ranger outposts, the outposts of the esoteric miles, and a winding network of paths that overlapped and thinned out as you ascended. Still, for Kevin and Emily, both outdoor enthusiasts and well-practiced with navigation and wilderness basics, the trip felt like a final breath before post-college chaos. Kevin had just been accepted into a graduate program in Denver. Emily had a job lined up in Portland. This was their moment in between. On the first day, they made steady progress. Kevin noted their position with a compass, marking trees with chalk as they moved. Emily took photos with her analog camera, narrating their journey like a travel blogger. Day 1, spirits high, no blisters yet. Kevin's already regretting overpacking. At night, they pitched their tent beside the creek on Juniper Hollow, sharing canned soup and staring at stars. It was cold, but not unbearable. The fire crackled, and laughter echoed briefly through the woods. By day 2, they had climbed over 1,500 feet, reaching the outer rim of Ravens Point. Emily's notes grew more reflective. She wrote in her leather-bound travel journal, "There's something unfiltered about this place. The quiet isn't peaceful. It's dense, feels like it's holding its breath." Kevin brushed it off, joking she was going to write poetry and live off-grid. She rolled her eyes, but didn't disagree. Day 3, the path grew thinner. They had planned to turn back after reaching a plateau called Needles Rest, a flat stretch often used by hikers to rest before descending. They never made it, or if they did, no one saw them again. By day 5, when the couple didn't return as scheduled, Kevin's sister grew anxious. She called Emily's parents, who confirmed they hadn't heard from her either. The initial worry turned into panic. Calls were made, reports were filed. The sheriff's department initiated a search and rescue mission, coordinating with local rangers and volunteers. Helicopters scanned the region, dogs were brought in, maps were examined, paths retraced. Nothing, except a single shoe print found near Hollow Brook, a muddy depression about 6 miles off their expected route. It matched Kevin's hiking boot, but there was no sign of struggle, no sign of camp, no torn fabric, no dropped belongings. The print was facing uphill toward the deeper part of the forest, away from the direction they should have been coming from. The media caught wind of it. Young couple vanishes in Oregon wilderness, but the story faded after 2 weeks. There were too many similar disappearances, too few answers. Officials suggested hypothermia, a wrong turn, an animal encounter, but those who knew Kevin and Emily doubted it. They were cautious, prepared smart. Emily had once led a student wilderness survival weekend. Kevin was known for his precision. They wouldn't have just vanished, her father kept repeating. Not like this. Rumors swirled. Locals spoke of strange sounds in the hills. A hiker claimed to have seen a faint orange light in the forest one night, far off the trail. Someone else mentioned an abandoned shack deep in the woods, though no map showed such a place. Nothing could be proven. After 6 weeks, the search scaled back. The woods reclaimed their silence. Back in Portland, their families held vigils. Kevin's mother placed a small plaque in her garden. Emily's journal excerpts were published online, part tribute, part plea. "We will not stop searching," Emily's brother said on TV, voice breaking. But months passed, then years. The memory dimmed. Cedar Hills remained as it always had, serene, unforgiving. The trail markers faded. The chalk Kevin had marked had long since washed away. The forest swallowed their path whole. In the weeks that followed Kevin and Emily's disappearances, tension grew sharper, not only in the hearts of the families, but within the walls of the investigation room. The official narrative shifted subtly but distinctly. What if this wasn't a simple case of getting lost? Detective Marla Hendricks, assigned to the case from the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department, sat across from Emily's parents in their small living room, sipping lukewarm coffee and trying to reconcile the warmth of their stories with the coldness of speculation. She cleared her throat and said carefully, "Was there any possibility that Kevin didn't want to come back?" The question hung in the air, slicing through hope like frost. Emily's mother gasped. Her father's knuckles whitened around his cup. "Absolutely not," he said through clenched teeth. They had just signed a lease together in Portland. He had a grad program starting in the fall. They were planning their wedding for next spring. But Marla's mind was following a different trail. According to Emily's best friend, Chloe, who had come forward reluctantly after the news broke, Emily had told her she suspected she was pregnant shortly before the trip. She hadn't taken a test, but she was late, and she was nervous about telling Kevin. Chloe claimed she hadn't said anything because she wasn't sure if it mattered now. That one conversation, though, was enough to feed speculation. Investigators began floating a theory. Kevin panicked at the idea of fatherhood, led Emily into the woods, then staged their disappearance. It was a leap, and not one supported by evidence, but it shifted focus. Kevin, who had been painted as the loving, responsible boyfriend, was suddenly cast under a more suspicious light. Articles began using language like possibly unsuspicious or carrying emotional burden. Emily's father fought hard to counter these ideas, reaching out to every reporter he could find, reminding them that the couple had left behind camping permits, handwritten maps, and receipts from gear shops, all showing they planned to return. Still, the whispers spread. Then came the tip. A hiker named Brian Adkins captured the sheriff's office after seeing news coverage. He claimed that on the morning of June 17th, the day after Kevin and Emily were due back, he'd been parked at a roadside turnout about 3 miles south of the Cedar Hills entrance. While waiting for a friend, he noticed an old dark green pickup truck with a canvas top parked oddly close to the tree line, its engine off, driver absent. What caught his attention wasn't just the strange location, but the way the truck's wheels were half sunk into mud, as if it had been there overnight. The license plate, he said, was obscured by dried mud, and the back appeared to be weighed down by something. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. Trucks came and went in these woods, loggers, hunters, drifters, but after watching the news, he was sure it hadn't been there by accident. The vehicle was never found. Patrols were sent to scour the area Brian described, but no tire tracks remained, no oil stains, nothing to suggest a vehicle had even been there. Recent rains had washed the dirt clean, no security cameras pointed toward that side of the road, and the few businesses nearby had closed long before that morning. The lead dissolved into vapor. Detective Hendricks requested access to Kevin's phone records and banking activity. His last call was to Emily the day before they left, and neither phone had pinged a tower since entering the park. Their bank accounts were untouched, had last been used to buy trail mix and bottled water from a gas station in Newport. Emily had withdrawn $60, 0 cents in cash, presumably for emergencies, nothing more. In frustration, the police turned inward. They re-interviewed friends, roommates, professors. They brought in a behavioral psychologist to assess Kevin's personality from emails and essays. The conclusion: he was analytical, quiet, emotionally mature, the kind of person who prepared for the worst-case scenario, not someone who'd vanish into the woods out of fear. Even so, the department quietly reduced the urgency of the case. They labeled it cold excellent, which meant it was technically open but no longer under immediate pursuit. Resources shifted elsewhere. The media attention waned. The families were left with weekly check-ins that said nothing new. Just, "We're still looking," which over time felt like, "We've stopped." 1 year later, Emily's mother visited Cedar Hills alone. She walked the initial 4 miles of the same trail they had taken. She placed a bouquet of wildflowers at Hollow Brook, where Kevin's boot print had been found, and whispered, "We know you didn't run." Then she sat on a mossy rock for hours, listening to the wind. Meanwhile, on an anonymous online forum for missing persons, a user under the name TrailLight1000 985, posted a thread. Strange trucks spotted near Cedar Hills. The same week 2 hikers vanished. Anyone remember more? The post didn't get much traction. A few replies suggested it could have been someone camping illegally or hiding stolen gear. One user claimed local meth dealers something used that road. The conversation died. In the small wood-paneled sheriff's office, a file marked Rhodes Marshallin gathered dust. Inside were maps with red pins, blurry photographs from search drones, and a list of names scrawled in black ink under a subheading. Unfrom out to this page, Brian Atkins. Date, July 2000, 1985. Status, inclusive. And still, in the quiet corners of both families' homes, letters remained unopened. Wedding plans never canceled, a nursery never started. Every birthday, Emily's father bought a card and wrote inside it what he would have said that year. He stored them in a box in the attic. Kevin's sister left his college acceptance letter on the fridge for 2 years. She never took it down. She just stopped noticing it. Yet one night, nearly 5 years later, a man named John Bowers, retired forest ranger, told his grandson about an old hunting cabin deep off trail, closer to the restricted northern rim. He said, "They say no one goes there anymore, but sometimes I see smoke rising when I hike nearby." His grandson, intrigued, made a mental note. It wouldn't be until years later that the memory would resurface, and by then, the snow had melted, the paths had shifted, and a strange glint of glass was beginning to peek from beneath the roots of an old pine. 5 years had passed since Kevin and Emily vanished in the thick of Cedar Hills. Their story faded into the background noise of unresolved tragedies, the kind that families still lived through in silence while the world moved on. But the mountains never forgot, and sometimes neither did those who had walked them long enough to drop them in his late 60s, had spent decades Pat on at long 60s, had spent decades patrolling the Cedar Hills region. He knew the terrain better than anyone, from the official trails to the nameless ridgelines only accessible by instinct and memory. During a conversation with his grandson, an eager college student researching unsolved wilderness cases, John casually mentioned something that had lingered in his mind for years. An abandoned cabin, hidden deep in the northern rim, past the marked maps, in a stretch of land so remote that even the rescue teams hadn't dared to sweep it thoroughly. John hadn't thought about the cabin in a long time. It had been decades since he last visited it, sometime around late June 1985, shortly after the media buzz about the missing couple had reached his ranger station. He remembered hiking near the northern ridge after spotting unusual smoke from a distance. Curious, he pushed through the underbrush, climbed a loose slope, and found the cabin, weathered, slanted, but unmistakably used recently. There had been signs of someone staying there, ashes in the fireplace, an old can of beans still warm, and faint footprints in the damp soil behind the structure. But when he reported the discovery to his supervisor, the information had been dismissed as coincidental. Transient hunter, they had said, too far from the couple's last known route. Now, with years behind him and guilt lingering in his bones, John decided to speak up. His grandson urged him to reach out to the Rhodes family. Within 2 weeks, Emily's brother Michael made the drive to meet John in person. He brought along a topographic map and laid it out on John's kitchen table. The old ranger's finger traced a narrow ravine, veered sharply to the east, and stopped just below a crag labeled Stone Teeth. He said, "You follow the dry creek bed, about 3 hours in. It's off-grid, but it's there." Michael didn't wait. He filed a formal request with the Forest Service to access the restricted area. It took over a month to get approval, and even then only under strict terms. Limited personnel, daylight hours only, no disturbing structures. He assembled a team, himself, a hired wilderness guide, and a longtime friend of Kevin's named Lisa, who had grown up hiking with them. On a brisk morning in late September, they began the climb. It took nearly 4 hours to reach the cabin. The path was barely discernible, choked with brambles and half-scattered trees. The structure itself stood on a mossy ledge, leaning against a curtain of roots and rock. From a distance, it looked like a ghost's retreat, shingles missing, the door hanging by one hinge, and the faint smell of damp rot in the air. Yet, as they approached, it was clear the place had once been lived in. The interior was sparse, a rusted stove, a broken cot, and piles of dry leaves swept into the corners. A tin mug lay on the floor near the hearth, half filled with rainwater and decomposing pine needles. Michael, with hands trembling from fatigue and adrenaline, began inspecting the dirt-packed floor. He didn't expect much, this place had been untouched for years, but his gaze caught on something glinting beneath a broken floorboard near the wall. Dropping to his knees, he brushed away the dirt, then pried up the splintered wood. There, nestled in the soil, was a small ivory comb. He pulled it out gently, and as he turned it over in his palm, the letters E.R. came into view, etched faintly but unmistakably across the spine. His breath caught. Lisa moved beside him and saw the comb. Her eyes widened. "Emily Rhodes," she whispered. It was a common enough object, easy to dismiss as coincidence, except that Emily had owned a comb just like it. He remembered seeing it on her dresser, a gift from their grandmother engraved years ago when Emily turned 15. Michael sat back, eyes locked on the tiny relic, and for the first time in 5 years, he felt a cold certainty slide into his chest. Emily had been here. They searched the rest of the cabin with renewed urgency. Lisa found a small corner behind the stove where soot was oddly disturbed, revealing a smudge of faded fabric beneath. It turned out to be a sleeve, too worn to identify, but threaded with a pattern of red stitching that Kevin's mother had once embroidered into one of his favorite shirts. They took photos, marked the GPS coordinates, and made their way back down before dusk with the comb wrapped tightly in a Ziploc bag. The report, filed 2 days later, reignited interest in the case. Detective Hendricks, long reassigned to another division but still haunted by the Rhodes Messiah file, requested to rejoin the investigation. Lab results later confirmed the comb's material dated back to the early 80s. Microscopic fibers found in the cabin matched a rare wool blend manufactured during that same decade, consistent with clothing Emily had been known to wear. The cabin, once dismissed, was now a focal point. But no bones were found, no journal, no sleeping bags, no signs of a sustained presence. Whatever had happened there had been temporary, fleeting, and deeply troubling. The question emerged again and again in Michael's mind. If they made it this far, why didn't they leave more behind? What had stopped them from escaping, and who else might have known about this place? As he lay awake at night, the comb resting in a glass case on his bookshelf, another thought began to uncoil slowly, terrifyingly. Maybe they weren't alone in that cabin. Nearly a year after the discovery of the ivory comb, the Rhodes and Marshall families remained suspended in the same agonizing limbo, closer than ever to the truth, yet still a breath away from understanding what had truly happened. The old cabin off the northern rim had provided a haunting glimpse, but no answers. Then, on an unassuming spring afternoon in Baker City, Oregon, a man named Cole Hartley was sorting through the remnants of his late grandfather's estate. His grandfather, Henry Hartley, had been a reclusive figure, a World War II veteran who later worked in forestry and spent the final years of his life living alone on the outskirts of town, surrounded by tools, documents, and unopened letters. The storage shed behind the house had long been considered off-limits, mostly because it was cluttered with decades of junk and dust, but now it was Cole's responsibility to clean it out and prepare the property for sale. Among rusted saw blades, war medals, and rodent-bitten tarps, Cole discovered an old wooden filing box labeled Topography Eastern Ranges. Inside were several folded USGS maps from the 1970S and 1980S, annotated with red pencil marks, scribbles in shaky handwriting, and dates that coincided with some of the years when his grandfather had lived most remotely. One map in particular drew his attention. It was a topographical survey of North Bend Gorge, a narrow, steep ravine nestled between two ridgelines in the Cedar Hills region. The area had long been off-limits. Cole remembered as a child hearing that it had once been cordoned off by federal agencies citing national security concerns, though no one ever explained to find it before what that meant. The map had several circles drawn around the gorge and its surrounding cliffs. Next to one of the circles was a note. Lights moving at 2:11 a.m., June 18th, 85, consistent 3 nights. Another scrawl, barely legible, read, "Screams echoing from Gulch, sound carried north." Cole felt a chill coil in his spine. The date, June 18, 1985, was the day after Kevin and Emily had last been expected home. He snapped a photo of the map and posted it to an online forum for amateur historians, asking if anyone could shed light on why the North Bend Gorge would have been flagged as restricted in the 1985. Within hours, replies poured in. Some mentioned Cold War surveillance posts, others suggested geological instability or hidden mining operations. But buried among the speculative noise was a reply from a user named Mir the Garden, 77, who claimed to have grown up near the gorge. "I remember that summer," he wrote. "We weren't allowed near the gorge. My dad said there were federal men surveying something, but the locals talked about people hearing strange things. Yelling, flares in the sky." Cole knew he had stumbled into something significant. He dug deeper into the maps and documents in the box. Several pages looked like journal entries, dated from 1983 to 1987. Most were mundane, weather patterns, trail erosion notes, deer migration, but some entries were more cryptic. One, dated June 21, 1985, read, "Lights again last night. Not flares, gone like a 7 last night. Not flares, pulsing, 2 figures by the ridge, gone before dawn." Another, from July, read, "Saw movement at Cabin X, smoke for 7 minutes, then silence. Don't trust the ones in the green truck." The mention of a green truck sent a shockwave through Cole. He remembered the Rhodes case and the sighting of a suspicious vehicle covered in mud near Cedar Hills. He reached out to local authorities and offered the map, insisting it could be connected to the disappearance from years ago. Initially skeptical, the Baker County Sheriff's Office forwarded the materials to Lincoln County, where the Rhodes Marshall file had quietly lingered. When Detective Hendricks saw the scans, her jaw clenched. The handwriting on the map bore similarities to notes she had seen in other ranger logs from the ADS. She tracked down the original ranger station records, cross-referenced signatures, and confirmed that Henry Hartley had indeed filed numerous patrol reports from the Cedar Hills region during the time of the couple's disappearance. Now, armed with the potential location of a previously undocumented site and multiple references to strange activities dated within days of Kevin and Emily's vanishing, Hendricks petitioned the Forest Service to grant limited access to North Bend Gorge for investigative purposes. The request was denied. The area was still considered unstable due to landslides, and no civilian access was permitted. Frustrated but undeterred, Emily's brother Michael contacted a private geologist and arranged an aerial drone survey over the region using laylapped over longitude. While most of the terrain was unremarkable, one section near the gorge's western edge revealed a sunken pattern consistent with the remains of a collapsed structure, possibly a cabin obscured by decades of overgrowth. The drone footage was enough to spark renewed interest. Journalists caught wind of the discovery and reignited public curiosity about the Rhodes Marshall case. A local news crew requested to interview Cole, who reluctantly agreed. In the interview, he explained how the markings on his grandfather's map aligned eerily with dates and locations linked to the missing couple. When asked what he thought his grandfather had been documenting, Cole hesitated, then said, "I think he was watching something he couldn't explain, and maybe he was scared to talk about it." The phrase caught the public's attention. Forums lit up again. Online sleuths began cross-referencing historical weather data, moon phases, and military flight paths. Some theorized illegal operations, while others suggested underground shelters. Some speculated that Henry Hartley might have been an unwitting witness to a crime. But one common thread emerged. Whatever happened in North Bend Gorge during that summer had left an impression deep enough for a man to record it, obsessively, and then hide it away for decades. Meanwhile, Michael revisited the cabin site where they had found the comb, this time bringing with him a printout of the annotated map. He stood at the edge of the clearing, turning in the direction the lights were reportedly seen from, and squinted against the tree line. If Hartley had seen lights from his post in the gorge, and if the figures he noted had appeared near Cabin X, then what lay between those points? A path, a hiding place, or something else entirely? Just then, Lisa, who had joined him again, called from the edge of the clearing. "There's something under this moss," she said, brushing away a layer of damp green to reveal In the summer of 2004, Cedar Hills once again made its quiet presence felt in the lives of those who had tried to forget it. A school in Lane County had organized a wilderness survival camp for its junior class, and a group of 25 high schoolers was led into the remote western ridge for 6 days of learning primitive skills, away from phones, parents, and distractions. Among them was 16-year-old Blake Hammond, a quiet boy with a fascination for history and an odd love for digging in dirt. On the third day of the camp, while practicing fire pit construction just beyond the main clearing, Blake struck something hard beneath the soil with his trowel. At first he thought it was a rock, but as he dug further, he uncovered the rounded shape of a glass jar, weathered, dirt-caked, and sealed tight with a rusting lid. The counselor was skeptical when Blake insisted it looked old, but curiosity got the better of him. Together, they pried open the jar, breaking the vacuum seal with a faint hiss and lifting out what looked like old, damp paper. Most of it had blurred into brownish pulp, illegible and crumbling at the edges. But one fragment, sandwiched in the middle, had been relatively preserved, pressed tight between two more decaying pieces. On it, in jagged script, was a sentence, partially faded but still painfully legible. "We are being held, not allowed to leave." The camp director reported the discovery, and soon the jar and its contents were handed over to the state police. Detective Marla Hendricks, recently reinstated on cold case reviews, was stunned when the call reached her desk. The case file of Kevin Marshall and Emily Rhodes had long been considered inactive despite the periodic rumors and half-clues. Now, nearly 20 years after they had vanished, this unexpected find breathed new life into what she had always suspected was no ordinary disappearance. The fragment of writing was rushed to the forensic lab. It took 2 weeks of chemical treatments, microscopic imaging, and stabilization before analysts could produce a high-resolution scan of the original sentence. Then came the comparison. Kevin Marshall's high school records were still archived by the district, one of the few benefits of the pre-digital age. His writing samples from 10th grade essays, detention slips, and a short handwritten apology letter from 1982 were analyzed in parallel. The result was almost immediate. The curvature of the capital W and the sharp downward tilt of his lowercase d matched Kevin's script with 95% confidence. It was more than enough for Detective Hendricks to include it as authenticated evidence. She sat in silence when the result came back, staring at the screen. Kevin had written those words. He had been alive, after the media left, after the search parties gave up, after the files had been packed in boxes. Alive and trapped. The location where the jar had been found was less than 4 miles from the cabin discovered 5 years earlier, the one where Emily's comb had surfaced. But this area had never been searched before, lying just west of the old campfire line, overgrown by alder saplings and ignored by all topographic sweeps from the 1990s. It was, effectively, a no-man's land, neither part of the federal preserve nor of any official route. Hendricks drove up to Lane County herself and walked the site with the ranger assigned to the camp. She found the excavation spot marked by a red ribbon Blake had tied to the nearest tree. The soil was soft, a little darker than the rest, possibly from ash residue. It had rained the day before, but the scent of turned earth still lingered. She crouched beside the pit, holding a printout of the scanned note. "We are being held, not allowed to leave." The words echoed in her head like a bell rung inside a sealed room. This wasn't misadventure. This wasn't a fall or a lost trail. Someone had imprisoned them. Hendricks ordered a full dig of the area under a temporary archaeological permit. In 2 days, volunteers and field agents began careful excavation, mapping out a 10-foot perimeter around the site. Fragments of charred wood were recovered. Pieces of cloth, rotted and barely holding shape, emerged by the 4th day. Nothing as definitive as a body or ID, but enough to confirm the presence of a makeshift camp. At the same time, lab analysts tested the soil for trace evidence, hair, blood, anything. The tests were inconclusive. But the handwriting was not. Kevin had written the note, and if the message was to be believed, he had done so under duress. Hexon expanded the investigation once again. She reopened interviews with the older residents of the area, searching for anyone who remembered strange noises, lights, or rumors from that time. She returned to the Rhodes family with the forensic report. Emily's mother wept silently, the printout clutched in her hands, whispering her daughter's name like a prayer. Kevin's father, now frail and confined to a wheelchair, said one word through tight lips: proof. The jar now sat in a secure evidence box, labeled KM5. It joined the comb, the annotated map, the faded field jacket. Slowly, painfully, the picture was becoming clear. But still missing were the captors, the motive, and above all, the end. The summer of 2007 was particularly dry in southern Oregon. A prolonged drought, combined with a series of lightning storms, triggered multiple wildfires throughout the Cascade backcountry. One such blaze, dubbed the Snake Rock Fire, ravaged over 2,000 acres of forest land east of Cedar Hills. Firefighters battled the flames for nearly a week before containment was finally declared. As the smoke cleared and damage assessments began, a patrol team sweeping the northwestern edge of the burn zone stumbled upon the charred remains of what appeared to be an old canvas tent, hidden deep in a hollow near the Snake Rock Trail, an area rarely frequented due to its rugged terrain and steep, unstepacious slopes. The structure had collapsed into ash and blackened stakes, but beneath the smoldering remnants, a discovery halted the crew in their tracks. Half buried in soot was a human forearm, scorched but intact enough for visual analysis. Attached to the wrist was a tarnished silver bracelet, warped by heat but still legible. Engraved crudely but unmistakably were the letters K and E 1984. The crew flagged the site and contacted the Oregon State Police. Within hours, the fire zone was treated as a potential crime scene. Detective Marla Hendricks, now deeply invested in the Marshall Rhodes case, received the call and was on site the following morning. The bracelet detail struck her immediately. 1984, the year before Emily and Kevin vanished, Karen and E was more than just coincidence. She ordered a full excavation of the burned area, enlisting a forensic anthropology team to sift through the layers of ash and earth. Carefully, they retrieved the arm, wrapping it in sterilized gauze and sending it to the state medical examiner. Further down, beneath a collapsed ridge of partially burned roots, they uncovered a rusted tin mug, a melted zippered pouch containing what looked like coins, and a piece of faded denim with seams indicative of women's jeans from the early 80s. But something disturbed Hendricks even more than the bracelet. There was only one bone. Over the next 3 weeks, forensic testing confirmed the work. Mitochondrial DNA extracted from the bone matched samples from the Rhodes family. It was Emily. Hendricks informed the family personally. Emily's mother sat in the living room, staring at a wall photo from 1983. She said nothing for several minutes, before whispering, "At least we have something now." But closure still evaded them, because the forensics team had more to say. The radius bone, where the bracelet had been discovered, showed clear signs of post-mortem damage inconsistent with fire exposure. Small parallel scratches, similar to tool marks, suggested that the limb had been severed cleanly. Furthermore, the surrounding soil lacked the necessary volume of human remains if the rest of the body had been consumed by fire. Forensic geologist Dr. Ellen Pack explained to Hendricks that if a whole body had been present and burned in that tent, the ground would contain a detectable level of calcium phosphate residue. It didn't. Only the arm had been there. Someone had placed it or transported it well after Emily had died. Hendricks examined maps of the area and noted the proximity to the location where Kevin's handwriting had been found 3 years earlier. The jar had been buried just under 4 miles to the southwest. Now this burned-out campsite, hidden for decades, possibly reused, stood in silent witness to something dark. And still, the rest of Emily's remains were missing. The presence of the bracelet opened another line of inquiry. Forensic jewelers cleaned and analyzed the silver. The engraving was determined to have been etched with a common steel needle, likely handheld. It matched a style popular with young adults customizing jewelry in the early 80s. When shown the bracelet in a photo, Kevin's sister Mary recalled that Emily used to wear a thin silver band that Kevin had marked for her during their senior year. He did it in the back of his pickup with a screw from his glove box, she said. I remember her laughing because it came out crooked. The crooked letters matched. The question now burned brighter than ever. Who moved Emily's remains? Why was only her arm found, and why was it near a hidden camp that had not been registered, mapped, or mentioned in any ranger logs? Hendricks began to form a hypothesis. Emily had died, possibly early into their disappearance, and her body had been either concealed or dismembered by whomever had held them. The severed arm may have been left behind deliberately or used as a decoy or lost, but someone had reason to keep the truth hidden, and they had gone to elaborate lengths to ensure it stayed buried. Weeks passed, but no additional bones were found despite a wider sweep. Investigators re-interviewed former rangers, survivalists, and known S-squatters with records from the 80s and 90s. No one remembered the camp near Snake Rock. Hendricks turned back to the old map discovered in Baker City, the one marked restricted for national security. Snake Rock Gorge sat right at the edge of that annotation, and though no formal record linked the site to government use, a retired fire marshal recalled that during the late 80s, certain burn permits had been suspended without reason in that corridor. That piece of information gave Henry's pause. If someone with authority had blocked access back then, who were they protecting, or what were they hiding? But these were speculations. The facts, for now, remained. Emily Rhodes had been definitively located after 22 years. Her final resting place was not a grave, but a scorched pit at the edge of forgotten wilderness. Yet the absence of her full remains and the silent ground around that burned tent whispered of movements, decisions, and stories yet unearthed. In early spring of 2010, as snow melted along the edges of the high trails above Cedar Hills and the forest rangers began their seasonal rounds, a man named Malcolm Dyer walked into the small sheriff's substation in Myrtle Creek unannounced. He wore a threadbare flannel shirt, canvas pants frayed at the cuffs, and boots stained with decades of dirt. His face bore the lines of a life spent under sun and rain, and his hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from something unspoken. The deputy on duty, surprised by the old man's sudden presence, asked if he needed assistance. "I have something I should have said a long time ago," Malcolm muttered, his voice dry as bark. They offered him a seat and water, and as he sipped, he began to speak, eyes never quite meeting anyone else's. Malcolm Dyer was 72 years old and had lived for the past several decades in the remote hills southwest of Cedar Hills. During his 30s and 40s, he had been part of what he called the Silent Fringe, a loose group of loners, ex-military, and isolationists who occupied unclaimed cabins hunted out of society. "We weren't criminals," he said, "just people who didn't want to be told how to live." His cabin had been tucked between the Twin Pines Ravine and a now overgrown fire trail called Ledge Hollow. He'd lived with minimal contact, rarely coming down for supplies, and mostly kept to himself, until one evening in late summer 1985 changed everything. It was dusk when he first saw them, two figures maybe 100 yards from his cabin near an old rock outcrop locals called the Shelf. The fading light revealed their silhouettes only partially, but something was wrong. Their posture was unnatural, slouched and leaning awkwardly. Malcolm watched through a pair of field binoculars he kept for spotting deer. What he saw turned his stomach. A man and a woman, both with their hands bound behind their backs, seated on the ground beside a pine tree, guarded, though that word felt inadequate, by two other men with rifles slung casually across their shoulders. One of the captives seemed to be speaking, though Malcolm couldn't hear from his distance. The other looked down, motionless. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he watched from the shadows of the timberline, unsure what to do. The next morning, as he moved quietly toward the Shelf, intending to get closer, 3 men stood in his path. He remembered their faces with unsettling clarity. One was tall and pale, with sunken cheeks and a patchy beard. The other 2 wore mismatched military surplus jackets. They didn't yell, they didn't threaten with visible weapons, but their message was unmistakable. "You saw what you weren't meant to," one said. "Forget it, old man, or you'll lie beside them before the season's out." Another added, "They don't matter." "And neither will you." It was not the kind of threat that needed repeating. Malcolm turned back and never walked that trail again. He had stayed silent for 25 years. He buried the memory under the same brush and snow that covered the forest trails, convincing himself there was nothing he could have done. But after I saw on the news that girl's bracelet, he told the sheriff's office, referring to the silver band found in the fire zone in 2007, I knew I couldn't carry it any longer. Malcolm's statement was sworn and recorded. Detective Marla Hendricks was called in once again. She listened to the audio multiple times, her brow furrowed deeper with every word. The location Malcolm mentioned, the shelf, was less than a mile from Snake Rock Trail. It fit. The sightings, the threats, the descriptions. It all aligned. Malcolm was not able to identify names, but his recollection of the men's behavior, their discipline, and the nature of their warnings pointed to a group with a clear hierarchy and intent. Not vagrants or random hermits, this was organized. His mention of the mismatched military gear echoed earlier theories that some members of this hidden group may have been former soldiers or survivalists gone rogue. Hendricks consulted retired law enforcement officers from the region. One recalled rumors in the mid-'80s of the Ridge Watchers, a nickname locals whispered for people who supposedly patrolled the deeper woods, warning off hikers and building strange lookouts. Nothing had ever been officially filed. Most brushed it off as folklore, but Malcolm's account gave weight to the old rumors. Towards the new house, forensic teams were redeployed to the shelf with precise coordinates Malcolm had given. They located an area of disturbed earth, long settled and hidden beneath fallen pine needles and erosion. No remains were immediately visible, but soil samples were taken and sent for analysis. In the meantime, Malcolm was placed under protective care, despite his insistence that they're long gone by now. Still, Hendricks wasn't convinced. If these men had been willing to hold captives in silence for weeks, maybe longer, what else had they done? What had they been protecting? And where had the others gone? Hendricks began cross-referencing old forestry logs, looking for unofficial shelters or clearings that had been noted but never cataloged. She also requested military discharge lists from the 70s and 80s, seeking patterns in veteran settlements or property claims near the disappearance site. Malcolm's confession, though not admissible as hard evidence, shifted the tone of the investigation. It was no longer a question of whether Kevin and Emily had been taken. The question was who else knew and for how long they had stayed silent. Following Malcolm Dyer's revelation, the Sheriff's Department in Myrtle Creek requested access to federal law enforcement archives related to unusual off-grid settlements or unregulated forest activity throughout the Pacific Northwest. After several weeks, a dusty manila folder marked Classified Limited Action 1983 arrived from an off-site FBI storage facility in Tacoma. Inside, the name Rust Commune purred repeatedly, a collective of unregistered individuals suspected of operating deep within federal forest lands, particularly along what was then known as the North Bend Preservation Zone. The file contained faded photographs, brief surveillance reports, and testimonies from forest rangers who had spotted unfamiliar activity near restricted gorges, including makeshift mining equipment, animal traps, and signs of long-term squatting. The individuals were never formally charged, as the terrain made pursuit nearly impossible, and no violent crimes had been linked to the commune at the time. Still, one sentence stood out in a 1984 Ranger memo: "They are ghost-like, vanishing at the scent of law. They carry no IDs. They speak little, if at all. They don't want to be found." Detective Hendricks, now convinced she was dealing with more than isolated acts of backwoods aggression, expanded her inquiry. Her attention turned to the area surrounding the shelf, where Malcolm had claimed to see Kevin and Emily restrained. She recalled an overlooked note in an earlier search log, an unmarked shack found further west from the presumed fire path. A secondary search unit was dispatched. The cabin they found had mostly collapsed, overtaken by moss and rot, but beneath the floorboards lay a corroded tin box. Inside were several sheets of lined paper, pressed together with damp, and an old camping journal wrapped in waxy cloth. The initials E.T.R. were faintly visible on the cover's corner. Forensic conservators were immediately brought in to preserve and recover the contents. Under ultraviolet light and digital enhancement, several pages revealed fragmented but intelligible passages. Among the most disturbing was a line hastily scrawled near the back of the notebook. "They won't let us leave. No reason, no ransom, just fear of being exposed." The tone of the journal was frantic, deteriorating from methodical observations of trail conditions and weather to cryptic notations and vague threats. Entries described being watched from tree lines, whispered voices at night, and eventually the sound of heavy boots and low conversations beyond the tent flaps. One passage, dated August 9, 1985, read, "Saw them again, 3 this time, all men. One stared at us, no words, just stood there and walked away." The journal was consistent with Emily's handwriting from school records and matched the same ink and style as the partially recovered pages found inside the glass jar years earlier. This new find solidified the theory that the couple had survived for days, possibly weeks, before being overtaken. The absence of any ransom demands or political motives suggested something else entirely: a localized threat with no outside connections and no interest in public exposure. The mention of just fear of being exposed echoed Malcolm's account of being warned into silence. Further entries painted a disturbing portrait of the captors. They were organized yet primitive, armed but not overtly violent unless provoked. They operated like a shadow community that existed just beyond the limits of mapped civilization. Emily noted that the men didn't speak like us, implying dialects or speech patterns that felt foreign or outdated. Another entry mentioned being moved from place to place, sometimes under cover of night, blindfolded or disoriented by rapid elevation changes. "We think they have tunnels," one line speculated, or caves. Kevin thinks he heard water. The FBI Rust Commune file included several unconfirmed rumors of similar sightings in other states, but no official links had ever been made. Still, the similarities were undeniable. The secluded terrain, lack of paper trails, military-style behavior, and aversion to outsiders mirrored Emily's descriptions. There was even a sketched map inside the FBI file, drawn by an anonymous informant in 1986, showing the location of a supposed meeting point near Cedar Gorge, less than 2 miles from where Malcolm had reported his sighting. That informant disappeared 6 months after submitting the map. Detective Hendricks had the name Rust Commune flagged in all future federal and state-level data-sharing systems. She issued an internal bulletin requesting any past or current reports of illegal settlements or unexplained disappearances in forest regions across Oregon. Simultaneously, she brought in geologists and former park rangers to assist in identifying possible underground tunnel systems or abandoned shafts where captives could have been held without trace. Meanwhile, Emily's cousin, who had pushed for private searches since the early 90s, now took to the media with renewed urgency. News outlets began running the story again, this time with the headline, "Cabin Confession Revives Mystery of Lost Couple." In an interview, she read aloud the line from Emily's journal, "No ransom, just fear." It gripped the public imagination. Theories multiplied, some plausible, others outlandish, but the core truth remained. Someone had held them, not for gain, but for secrecy. Back in the lab, analysts detected faint graphite imprints on the inner cover of the journal, as though a pencil had been pressed too hard and left ghostly shadows of past writings. After digital enhancement, a list of names appeared, partially smudged, possibly code names or aliases. Among them was the word Mara, repeated twice, and the initials VC beside a crude drawing of a flame. Investigators couldn't match them to any known individuals, but the notations suggested a hierarchy or internal system within the group. Hendricks began to believe that what had once been dismissed as a rustic cult or survivalist enclave was something more entrenched, something operating on unspoken rules passed down over years, if not decades. The further they dug, the more they realized how little was actually known about what lurked between the ridge lines and valleys. But now they had names, symbols, coordinates, and the words of the victim herself. All that remained was to determine whether any of the Rust Commune's descendants, if they existed, were still out there, guarding their silence with the same unyielding resolve as before. It was a volunteer expedition group, a mix of hikers, amateur sleuths, and a retired forest geologist who stumbled upon the remains. They had set out in the early spring of 2012 to revisit areas near Old Bear Creek that had long been inaccessible due to landslides and dense underbrush. A rock slide the previous winter had altered the terrain, shifting boulders and uprooting trees, revealing paths that hadn't been seen for decades. One volunteer, Carla Mendoza slipped while climbing along a narrow ridge and noticed what appeared to be weathered fabric caught in a crevice below. When they descended to investigate, they found more than just old clothing. They found bones. The remains were wedged between slabs of rock, partially shielded from the elements which had preserved them unusually well. A faded canvas jacket, brittle jeans, and hiking boots still clung to the skeletal frame. The team immediately alerted the authorities. Within 24 hours, forensic teams arrived and cordoned off the area. It took several days to carefully extract the remains, ensuring that no surrounding evidence would be lost to hasty movement. Once the body was examined, initial findings showed that the neck had been broken in a clean, downward force. There were no defensive wounds, no marks of struggle, and no signs of prolonged decay that would indicate exposure prior to death. The body had fallen, or been pushed, from a significant height. Dental records provided a tentative match, but it was the DNA sample drawn from a preserved molar that gave definitive confirmation. The remains were Kevin Harper. After more than 25 years, his family would finally receive an answer. Yet it was the discovery inside his right hiking boot that stunned investigators even more. Tucked behind the lining, wrapped in waxed twine, was a torn fragment of topographic map. The markings were faint, but under magnification, a red X had been drawn near a barely legible label. Cabin above ledge. The handwriting was consistent with Kevin's high school records. Analysts matched the torn edge with the map discovered in the Baker City warehouse in 1995. It was a perfect fit. The implications were chilling. Kevin, somehow aware of the location's significance, had hidden a piece of the map in the most unlikely place, his own shoe, as if he knew that his time was limited and this might be the only chance to pass on a clue. The tear line on the map suggested urgency. It hadn't been cut cleanly, it had been ripped hastily. A note in the margin, nearly illegible, read, "Don't let them bury this." Detective Hendricks stared at it for hours, wondering whether Kevin had written it in the minutes before his death, or if he had planned this far earlier, anticipating a fate he couldn't avoid. Pathologists confirmed the timing of death matched roughly within weeks of Emily's. Their bodies had not decayed at the same rate, only because of the drastically different environments where they were found. Emily's remains, scorched in a fire, had deteriorated faster. Kevin's, shielded from sunlight and moisture, had remained largely intact. Yet the question lingered. Why were they separated? Why move the bodies to different places if there was no attempt to conceal them completely? It seemed theatrical, deliberate even. The location where Kevin had been found was within 3 miles of the site marked on the recovered map. Forensic teams returned to the area immediately. They combed the vicinity around the ledge, rappelled down the cliff walls, and brought in dogs trained to detect old human remains. No new bodies were found, but they did discover evidence of a concealed footpath behind a cluster of boulders, leading to what appeared to be a dug-out earth shelter. The entrance had collapsed, possibly due to the same rock slide that had exposed Kevin's body. Still, inside were remnants of a primitive living space, burnt wood, fragments of ceramic, and what appeared to be a rusted lantern base. Hendricks had the cabin site cross-friend service with historical geological shifts. Satellite overlays confirmed that, in 1986, the area had a small wooden structure visible from air recon photos, its outline now gone. She believed this was the same place Kevin had marked. Perhaps the commune had used it as a temporary holdout, or perhaps Kevin and Emily had briefly escaped and hidden there before being recaptured. As the media picked up the discovery, speculation intensified. Some posited that Kevin had attempted an escape, was caught, and punished by being executed and disposed of with calculated cruelty. Others believed he had sacrificed himself to distract their captors so Emily could run, though that theory clashed with the timing of her confirmed death. A third group pushed an even darker idea that someone within the commune had grown sympathetic and helped him hide the clue before betraying him, or failing to protect him when the rest discovered his intentions. Back in town, Kevin's remaining family held a small memorial. His younger sister, only 12 when he vanished, stood at the podium and read from one of Kevin's old-school essays about the beauty of the Oregon wilds and the importance of never losing your sense of direction, even when you're afraid. The line seemed haunting now. If anything, Kevin had held on to that sense until the very end, leaving behind the only navigational clue capable of connecting decades of silence. In the wake of the discovery, state authorities agreed to fund a multi-agency task force to finally investigate all known disappearances in the North Bend Gorge and surrounding wilderness, dating back to the 1970s. The cabin Kevin marked was now a focal point. Forensics began to examine every inch of the area, hoping for DNA, fibers, or artifacts that could point to other victims, or perhaps surviving members of the so-called Rust Commune. Satellite imaging showed several unnatural formations deeper in the forest basin, perhaps more hidden shelters, perhaps more graves, and among them, just maybe, someone left behind. By the fall of 2014, after 2 years of cross-agency collaboration, extensive forensic analysis, and re-evaluation of cold case evidence, the FBI held a press conference in Portland to present the final report on the disappearance and deaths of Kevin Harper and Emily Rhodes. The atmosphere in the room was heavy, not with suspense, but with the quiet weight of resolution long overdue. Assistant Director Evelyn Marks summarized the findings with a somber calm, her voice unwavering as she revealed the sequence of events reconstructed from testimonies, physical evidence, and a now clear timeline. The report stated that Kevin and Emily, during their hike in the spring of 1986, had accidentally wandered into a remote section of the North Commune. These individuals, numbering between 6 and 12 at various points in time, had lived illegally in the region for years, sustaining themselves through illegal hunting, gold panning, and resource gathering, all while avoiding contact with the outside world. The commune members reportedly reacted with suspicion and panic when Kevin and Emily were spotted near their territory. Believing that the couple might report them to authorities, they chose not to release them. According to journal fragments and survivor testimony from Malcolm Dyer, who was the only known member to come forward alive, the group debated what to do for several days. Eventually, a decision was made. Kevin and Emily would be kept under watch and forced to assist with daily labor, fetching water and gathering supplies, all under the pretense that they might eventually be let go. But weeks passed, and as Emily's health declined, possibly from untreated infection or internal injury, Kevin began planning an escape. The FBI pieced together that Kevin had attempted to leave, either to get help or to create a diversion. He managed to slip away briefly, taking with him a torn portion of the original map that he hid in his boot, along with other notes concealed in Emily's diary. Before he could get far, he was captured. According to traces at the scene and autopsy evidence, he was forcibly pushed from the ridge above Old Bear Creek, suffering an immediate fatal neck fracture upon impact. The act was sudden, likely not premeditated, but intended as a brutal message to the remaining captive. Emily, now alone and weakened, survived for an unknown period following Kevin's death. She continued to write entries, as confirmed by the ink analysis and fading chronology within the jar letters. One final message suggested she knew her time was short. The line, "I don't think they'll keep me alive if I fall sick," stood out, written in faint but still legible script. Using what little strength she had, she buried the glass jar under the tree near the perimeter of the hideout. Her body, later discovered during the 2007 wildfire investigation, had likely been moved post-mortem. There were no indications of deliberate burial, which implied she may have died in isolation, and her remains were either dragged or relocated by remaining Q members in a desperate attempt to avoid evidence. The Rust Commune, as it turned out, had largely dissolved by the early 1990s. Members had scattered, assumed new identities, or died. The FBI tracked down 4 suspected individuals based on surviving fingerprints and anecdotal references in journals and letters. 2 were confirmed deceased. 1 had died in a car accident in 1993 under an alias. Another succumbed to illness in a Montana hospice in 2002. The remaining suspects had no fixed address, and despite issuing notices, they were never conclusively located. With no living individuals to charge and no forensic links that could stand up in court beyond a reasonable doubt, federal prosecutors declined to pursue criminal proceedings. The press and public responded with mixed emotions. Some were outraged that justice could not be formally served. Others felt that after almost 3 decades, the truth itself was the only justice left to be had. Kevin's family, now older and fewer in number, expressed bittersweet relief. "At least now we know," said his sister during a local memorial. "He didn't leave. He didn't run. He fought to tell the truth, even when he knew he wouldn't survive." Emily's relatives arranged a modest plaque installation at the overlook above North Bend Gorge, not far from where Kevin's body was found. The inscription read, "In memory of Emily Rhodes, whose courage outlived her days." Below it, etched in smaller text, was a line from her final note: "We're not allowed to leave, no reason, no ransom, only fear." It was a permanent reminder of their ordeal, preserved so that even if time dulled the tragedy, the truth would remain undeniable. In a final note to the case file, FBI Director Marks wrote, "The Rust Commune was not a myth, nor a rumor born of backwoods paranoia. It was real, it was dangerous, and it was capable of cruelty masked by fear." The story of Kevin and Emily reminds us that even in the most serene landscapes, darkness can take root. As the report was closed, North Bend Gorge was finally cleared for new trails and signage, with a commemorative path named Rhodes Harper Way, guiding visitors through the area once shrouded in secrecy. School groups now walk it on field trips, hearing the cautionary tale of what once happened there, learning not only about wilderness safety, but about the enduring strength of those who refused to disappear in silence. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, consider subscribing to the channel for more true mystery narratives. Drop a like if you felt the weight of Emily and Kevin's journey, and let us know in the comments what part of the story hit you the hardest. Also, where in the world are you watching from? We'd love to hear your thoughts.